Have you ever been asked to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm? That's what my family asked of me. They handed me the matches and the gasoline, disguised as a plea for grace and forgiveness, and told me it was my sacred duty to burn. For a long time I believed them. I stood in the ashes of my own life, smiling, pretending the smoke wasn't choking me, all to protect the man who had robbed me. My name is Stephanie, and this is the story of how I finally let the fire consume the person who lit the match, my brother, Pastor Daniel Vance. And if you've ever been the designated peacekeeper in your family, the one always expected to absorb the blows and forgive the unforgivable, then you need to hear this. You need to know that sometimes the most sacred act isn't forgiveness, it's justice. It all started, or rather, it all ended, on a Tuesday, the kind of bland, forgettable Tuesday that doesn't deserve to be the backdrop for a life imploding. I was at my desk, working my quiet, stable job as a data analyst for a regional logistics company. It was a job I'd held for 12 years, a job that allowed me to build, brick by painful brick, a savings account that represented my future, a house that didn't have paper-thin walls, a trip to Italy where I could eat pasta until I cried. A life that was mine. That savings account held $187,000. It was my life's work, the physical manifestation of every late night, every missed party, every boring weekend spent budgeting instead of brunching, and it was gone. My brother Daniel had taken it, not all at once, not in a way that would trigger a single screaming alarm from the bank. He'd done it the way he did everything, with a gentle, reassuring smile and a slow, methodical bleed. He was the charismatic pastor of Harmony Creek Community Church, a man whose voice could soothe a crying baby and charm a coiled snake. His sermons were legendary. People drove from 2 counties over to hear him speak about grace, redemption, and the power of second chances. Oh, the irony. He had a gift, I'll give him that. He could make you feel like you were the only person in a room of 500, that his words were a divine message meant just for you. 3 years prior, he'd come to me, his face a mask of shame and terror. The church was on the verge of collapse, he'd said. A series of bad investments made by the previous leadership, a leaky roof that cost a fortune, dwindling donations. He'd made a mistake, he whispered, his eyes welling with those perfect, camera-ready tears. He'd tried to cover the shortfalls himself, moving money around, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. He swore it was temporary, a desperate measure to keep the church doors open until a big fundraising drive could set things right. But he'd been caught in his own web. He'd embezzled from the church's building fund, and the board was about to find out. He needed money, a lot of it, and he needed it silently, immediately. My money. He swore on our mother's Bible, on the memory of our grandparents, that it was a loan. He would pay back every single cent once the church was stable again. He just needed to plug the hole before the auditors arrived. What was I supposed to do? He was my brother, the golden child of the Vance family, the one whose photograph sat in the center of the mantelpiece, while mine was tucked off to the side. Daniel the shining star, Stephanie the reliable planet orbiting him. To refuse would be to send him to prison, to bring shame and scandal down upon our parents, to destroy the church that was the very heart of our small town's social and spiritual life. So I did it. I drained my account. I signed the cashier's check with a hand that trembled so hard my signature was barely legible. I handed my future over to him in a plain white envelope. It wasn't about the money, I told myself. It was about family. It was about grace. That's what I repeated, a mantra to drown out the screaming in my soul. The fallout was immediate and suffocating. My parents, Martha and George, descended upon my small apartment the moment they heard what Daniel had done. They didn't come with apologies or sympathy for me. They came with a strategy. My mother, her face etched with a familiar, anxious severity, gripped my arm. Stephanie, you cannot tell anyone. This would ruin him. It would ruin us. Think of the church. Think of the good he does. Your father and I have our reputation in this town. We can't have our son, a pastor, labeled a thief. My father, a man who communicated mostly through disappointed sighs, and the rustle of his newspaper, was more direct. He stood by the window, refusing to look at me. Your brother made a mistake, a foolish one, but his heart was in the right place. He was trying to save his flock. Now the family has to come together to protect him. This needs to be handled quietly. You will forgive him, publicly. It wasn't a request, it was a command. A few days later, during a tense staged emergency meeting with the church elders, I played my part. I sat beside Daniel, who looked suitably remorseful, his head bowed. I stood up and told the 4 grim-faced men in the room that I had given my brother the money as a gift, an investment in his ministry, to help the church through a difficult time. I spoke of family, of faith, of supporting God's work. The words felt like ash in my mouth. The relief in that room was a physical thing. The elders who adored Daniel practically fell over themselves to praise my generosity and Christian spirit. The matter was closed. No scandal, no police, just the quiet, heroic sacrifice of a devoted sister. And that's when the second, more insidious betrayal began. My act of grace became Daniel's cornerstone. The next Sunday, he stood at the pulpit, his voice thick with emotion, and told a sanitized version of the story. He spoke of a moment of personal despair, of nearly failing his sacred trust, and of the incredible selfless love of a family member who stepped in, without question, to lift him up. He didn't use my name, but everyone knew. He turned my sacrifice into a parable. My pain became his sermon, illustration. The church exploded. Donations skyrocketed. People were moved by this story of humility and redemption. My forced forgiveness became the foundation of his renewed success. He was no longer just a charismatic pastor. He was the pastor who had been tested and saved by grace, making his message all the more potent. He built a new wing for the Sunday school and called it the Grace Wing. My parents would sit in the front pew, beaming with pride, sometimes glancing back at me in the 10th row with an expression that said, "See, it was all for the best." For 3 years, I lived in that quiet hell. I saw him driving a new car. I saw pictures of him and his wife on a cruise to Alaska, a gift from a grateful congregation. He'd announced, I ate cheap pasta at home and tried not to think about Italy. Every time I saw him, he'd wrap me in a hug and whisper, "I'll never forget what you did for me, Steph. I'll make it right." But he never did. The promise of repayment became a vague, distant platitude, like we should get coffee sometime. It was clear he had no intention of ever giving me a dime. He had what he wanted, his career, his reputation, and my silence. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. The breaking point, the real one, came not with a bang, but with a quiet click of a mouse. My best friend, Chloe, had been my lifeline through all of this. She was a fiercely loyal, no-nonsense graphic designer who saw my family for the nest of vipers they were. They're emotional vampires, Steph, she'd say over cheap wine at my kitchen table, and you're their favorite flavor. She never judged me for giving him the money. She just held my hand while I cried about it. Chloe had been helping me try to rebuild my finances. It was a slow, humiliating process. She was teaching me about investing in low-cost index funds, showing me how to set up a new high-yield savings account. One night, she was helping me consolidate some old digital accounts, closing things I no longer used. We stumbled upon an old shared family cloud storage account, something we'd set up years ago, to share photos of vacations and holidays. I hadn't looked at it in ages. Might as well clean this out too, Chloe said, navigating through folders named Christmas 2015 inches and Mom's 60th birthday. Then she paused. That's weird. There's a folder here with just a string of numbers as the name, and it's password protected. I didn't think anything of it, probably some old work files of my dad's. But Chloe, bless her suspicious heart, had a knack for passwords. Let's try the old family classics, she murmured. She tried my mom's birthday. No. My dad's. No. What about Daniel's holy number? The one he always uses for his Bible verses, she asked. He was obsessed with a particular verse, John 8:32. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. She typed in 832. The folder opened. My blood ran cold. It wasn't full of photos. It was full of spreadsheets, recent ones, and audio files. My hand was shaking as I double-clicked the first spreadsheet. It was titled, Discretionary Outreach Fund. But the line items weren't for soup kitchens or mission trips. They were for lakeside property down payment, luxury vehicle lease, investment portfolio contribution. It was a detailed ledger of him siphoning money from the church's new, overflowing donation coffers. He was bleeding the church dry, just like he'd bled me. He hadn't stopped. He had just gotten better at hiding it, using my forgiveness as a shield. My sacrifice hadn't saved him. It had empowered him. It had taught him that he could get away with it. Then I saw the audio files. They were recordings, phone calls. I clicked on one dated, just a few weeks after I'd given him the money. It was his voice, talking to someone. A financial advisor, it sounded like. Daniel was laughing. No, The initial capital was, let's call it, a divine windfall, an interest-free, and more importantly, guilt-backed loan that will never be called off. My sister, bless her heart, is more invested in my image than I am. She's not a problem, she's the solution. The air left my lungs, the room started to spin. Chloe grabbed my arm. Stephanie, breathe. But I couldn't, because I had just found the last file. It was labeled with my name. I clicked it, and there it was. The conversation we'd had in my apartment 3 years ago, the night before I'd gone to the elders. My voice, small and scared, asking him to promise he'd pay me back. And his voice, dripping with false sincerity. I promise, Steph, I swear to you, as soon as the church accounts are healthy again, I'll start making deposits. It'll come straight from the church's general fund. No one will even notice. It'll be our secret. He had recorded me. He had recorded his promise to repay me from church accounts, a felony, and he had kept it. Why? As insurance? As a trophy? A sick reminder of his victory. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd just handed me the weapon I never knew I needed, the truth. And John 8:32 echoed in my head. The truth will set you free. I looked at Chloe, the tears on my face, now cold with something new. Not grief, not despair. It was resolve. A resolve so hard and sharp, it felt like a shard of glass in my gut. He never stopped, I whispered. No, Chloe said, her voice soft but furious. He just got a taste for it. That night, sitting on my floor, surrounded by the digital ghost of my brother's greed, something inside me shifted. The part of me that had always sought peace, that had always put the family's comfort above my own, curled up and died. And in its place, a quiet, patient anger began to grow. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about justice. It was about protecting the hundreds of people who were being fleeced by a wolf in shepherd's clothing. He had used my grace as a shield. It was time to show him what it felt like when that shield was ripped away. The path was clear, but it was terrifying. To get justice for myself, and for them, I would have to become the very thing my parents feared most, the scandal. I would have to burn it all to the ground. The days that followed were a blur of furious calm. The initial shock gave way to a cold, methodical clarity. I couldn't just storm into the church, waving my phone with the recording. Daniel was a master manipulator. He would twist it, claim I was a bitter, jealous sister, that I had doctored the evidence. He would paint me as the villain, and with my parents' backing, the congregation would probably believe him. No, this had to be surgical. I needed more than a smoking gun. I needed the whole armory. My first call wasn't to a lawyer, it was to Chloe. We met at a 24-hour diner at 2 in the morning, a place where no one from Harmony Creek would ever see us. I slid a USB drive across the sticky table. I need you to make a dozen copies of this, I said. Store them in different places. Online, offline, whatever you can think of. If something happens to me, I need you to make sure this gets out. Chloe's eyes widened. Steph, what are you talking about? If something happens to you, I don't know, I admitted, my voice low. But he's cornered, and he's desperate. I don't want to take any chances. It was a statement that felt both paranoid and entirely rational. My plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, reconnaissance. I needed to understand the full scope of his fraud. The spreadsheets were a start, but they were his personal logs. I needed official documents. I needed a trail that couldn't be dismissed as a fantasy. This led me to the most terrifying part of the plan. I needed an ally inside the church. My mind immediately went to one person, Mrs. Eleanor Gable. Eleanor was the church treasurer, a sharp-eyed widow in her late 60s, who had been managing the church's books since before Daniel was born. She was meticulous, fiercely protective of the church, and from a generation that believed in balanced ledgers and God-fearing honesty. She had always been polite to me, but there was a coolness there. I think she saw me, in the aftermath of my gift, as part of the new flashy, less accountable era of the church that Daniel had ushered in. I had to win her trust. This was a massive gamble. If she was loyal to Daniel, my entire plan would be exposed before it even began. I spent a week drafting an email to her, writing and deleting, trying to find the right words. In the end, I kept it simple. I told her I was a data analyst, and that I had some concerns about financial best practices for nonprofits. I asked if she'd be willing to meet for coffee to discuss how the church handled its accounting, framing it as an offer of free professional help. It was a weak pretense, but it was the only one I had. To my shock, she replied within an hour, I would be delighted. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., my office. The church office was quiet on a Wednesday morning. Eleanor Gable's room was small and crammed with gray filing cabinets. She sat behind a large oak desk, her posture perfect, her gaze sharp and intelligent. Miss Vance, she said, her tone neutral, thank you for coming. What concerns did you have? I took a deep breath. There was no way to ease into this. I had to jump, Mrs. Gable, I began, my heart hammering against my ribs. 3 years ago, I gave my brother a significant amount of money. I was told it was to cover a shortfall and save the church from financial ruin. I was led to believe it was a one-time crisis. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, interest, confirmation, passed through her eyes. She said nothing, just folded her hands on her desk and waited. I have reason to believe, I continued, my voice steadier now, that the financial issues at this church did not end 3 years ago. I believe funds donated by the congregation are being systematically misappropriated by my brother. Silence. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into an eternity. I thought, this is it. She's going to pick up the phone and call Daniel. I failed. Then she leaned forward slightly. Miss Vance, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I have been the treasurer of this church for 34 years. For 30 of those years, every single penny was accounted for. We ran on a shoestring, but we were honest. For the past 4 years, since your brother took over, things have changed. Relief washed over me so intensely, I felt dizzy. He calls it modernizing, she went on, a note of contempt in her voice. He set up new accounts I don't have full access to, a discretionary outreach fund, an executive pastor's expense account. He tells me they're for flexible, fast-moving ministry, so he doesn't get bogged down in bureaucracy. He tells me the board approved it, and they did. He has them all eating out of the palm of his hand. So you've suspected it, I breathed. Suspecting and proving are two different things, my dear, she said, her eyes hard as steel. I see the reports he submits. They are vague. Community support $10,000. Ministerial supplies $5,000. I have no receipts, no invoices. When I ask for them, he smiles that beautiful smile of his, and tells me not to worry my head about it, that he'll handle it. He treats me like a dotty old woman. This was my opening. I have proof, I said. I explained about the cloud drive, the spreadsheets, the audio files. I didn't show them to her yet. Trust had to be a two-way street. I had to see if she would make the next move. She looked at me for a long time, her mind clearly working. I could see the internal debate, the weighing of risks, betraying her pastor versus betraying her conscience. Finally she made a decision. She stood up, walked to one of the gray filing cabinets, and unlocked it with a small key she wore on a chain around her neck. She pulled out a thin file folder. This is the official annual report, submitted to the board for the last fiscal year, she said, placing it on the desk in front of me. And this, she pulled out a worn, leather-bound ledger, is my personal log, where I track the incoming donation totals before they are deposited into the various accounts. She opened both. According to the official report, total donations were $650,000. According to my ledger, the actual total was closer to $900,000. There is $250,000 unaccounted for in his official report to the board. It's all been funneled into those discretionary accounts that only he controls. There it was, the corroboration, the beautiful, undeniable math. My data and her data told the same story. He thinks I'm just an old woman who doesn't understand cloud accounting, she said, a grim smile touching her lips. He doesn't realize I've been running my own parallel books in pencil and paper since the day he shut me out. This was my ally, my karmic agent, an old-school bookkeeper with a spine of iron. Phase 2 was weaponizing the information. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor and I worked in secret. We communicated through encrypted messaging apps Chloe set up for us. Eleanor would leave packages of documents, bank statements she did have access to, copies of vague invoices, minutes from board meetings, where Daniel had charmed his way into getting more financial autonomy, and a locker at a bus station. I would pick them up and spend my nights cross-referencing them with the files from Daniel's secret folder. A horrifying picture emerged. He wasn't just buying cars and property, he was gambling. There were wire transfers to offshore online investment platforms, high-risk ventures that had clearly gone bust. He was using the church's money as his personal slush fund to fuel a secret addiction. The sermons about grace were a cover for his own desperate cycle of loss and the need for more cash. We also found something else, something that made my stomach turn. He had taken out a second mortgage on the church building itself. He'd forged the signatures of 2 board members to do it. The church was now leveraged to the hilt, in debt for nearly $1 million. He hadn't just been stealing the donations. He had mortgaged the very ground they prayed on. This went beyond just him. This was a ticking time bomb that would destroy the entire community. This is where I had to confront a debatable piece of my own logic. I could have gone to the police right then, anonymously, but Daniel was slippery. He could claim a rogue employee, blame Eleanor, anything. The DA in our county was a member of his congregation. I had one shot at this, and it had to be clean. It had to be public. It had to be undeniable. I had to let him walk into his own trap. My justification was that the community deserved to see the truth from the source, not read about it in a police blotter. But a part of me, the part that was now cold and hard, knew the truth. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about vindication. I wanted to see the look on his face when his world came crashing down around him. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. Phase 3 was setting the trap. Chloe, my brilliant tech-savvy friend, was crucial here. You can't just play a recording, she said. You need a presentation. You need to show them the money trail. People understand visuals. For a week we worked on a PowerPoint presentation that would have made a corporate raider proud. We scanned the documents Eleanor had given me. We took screenshots of Daniel's spreadsheets. We created flowcharts showing the money leaving the donation fund and moving into his private accounts, then to the offshore platforms. We embedded the audio file of him promising to repay me from church funds. We embedded the audio file of him mocking my guilt-backed loan. We timed it all to a precise, devastating narrative. Now we just needed a stage, and I knew Daniel would provide one himself. His ego was his greatest vulnerability. He couldn't stand the thought of anyone questioning him. It was time for the first move, the silent takeover. The first move wasn't a cannonball. It was a single well-placed pebble. With Eleanor's guidance, I drafted an anonymous letter. It was addressed to the entire church board of elders, a group of well-meaning but utterly captivated men who saw Daniel as a spiritual son. The letter was calm, professional, and devastatingly precise. It didn't make wild accusations. It simply pointed out a series of public record discrepancies. It noted the date the second mortgage was taken out on the church property and asked why this significant liability had never been disclosed to the congregation during the annual budget meetings, as required by the church's own bylaws. It referenced the publicly declared value of the new Grace Wing construction and compared it to the unusually high contractor bids on record with the city, suggesting a potential for inflated billing. It didn't mention embezzlement or theft. It used safe, corporate words like fiscal irregularities and a need for enhanced transparency. The crucial line, a masterpiece of Eleanor's design, was at the end. As concerned members dedicated to the health of this church, we trust that the board will see the wisdom in commissioning a full, independent, external audit to clear up these clerical oversights and reassure the congregation. We didn't sign it. Chloe helped me send it from a public library computer a town over, using a newly created anonymous email address. Then we waited. The pebble hit the water, and the ripples started almost immediately. It took 3 days. My phone rang on a Friday night. It was my mother. Her voice was tight with a barely controlled panic. "Stephanie, I need you to come over. Now, your father and I need to talk to you." "I'm busy, Mom," I said, my voice deliberately flat. "This is not a request. Your brother is on his way. There's a situation at the church." "A situation? What kind of situation?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Some vicious, anonymous letter has been sent to the board. It's full of lies, terrible accusations. It's trying to undermine your brother's work." Her voice cracked. "After everything he's done, everything we've all sacrificed. Who would do such a thing?" I felt a cold thrill. He had no idea where it came from, so he assumed it had to be connected to the only secret he thought was out there, mine. He had run straight to our parents, his first line of defense, and they in turn had been deployed to manage me. "I don't know, Mom," I said. "Sounds serious. I hope they figure it out." "Stephanie, don't be difficult," she snapped. "Daniel thinks He thinks it might have something to do with you. Are you upset about the money? Is that it? After all this time, you're going to get bitter now. The patronizing tone, the immediate assumption that my motives had to be petty and emotional, it was so familiar, it was almost comforting. It strengthened my resolve. I have no idea what you're talking about, I said calmly. I'll pray for Daniel. Good night. I hung up before she could reply. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. It was working. He was panicked, and his first instinct was to assume I was the source of the threat. The next call came an hour later. It was Daniel. His voice, usually so smooth and resonant, was strained. Steph, we need to talk. Daniel, it's late. Don't do this, he hissed, the mask of the gentle pastor gone completely. I don't know who you've been talking to, or what you think you're doing, but you need to stop. You are playing with fire. I have no idea what you mean, I repeated, my voice a monotone. I was a blank wall, giving him nothing to grab onto. This letter, this audit, this is you, isn't it? After everything I did to protect the church, to build it into something special, you're going to tear it all down over some money. Is that how little faith you have? He was trying to use the old tools, guilt, spiritual blackmail, but they were blunted now. They couldn't penetrate the cold calm that had settled over me. Are you threatening me, Daniel? I asked, letting a little tremor of fake fear enter my voice. I had my own recording app running now, a little gift from Chloe. His tone shifted instantly. The pastor was back. No, of course not, little sister. I'm worried about you. You sound stressed. This path you're going down, it's a dark one. It leads to bitterness and isolation. Forgiveness is the only way to find peace. You taught me that, remember? He was using my own forced forgiveness against me. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I remember everything, Daniel, I said softly, and I let the double meaning hang in the air. I have to go. I hung up again. The panic was escalating. The anonymous letter had forced the board's hand. They couldn't ignore a request for an audit without looking like they had something to hide. Eleanor called me the next day. It's done, she whispered, her voice giddy with a righteous fire. The board voted this morning. They've hired an independent accounting firm from the city. They start on Monday. Daniel's final, desperate move came on Sunday. He stood at the pulpit, his face pale, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. He delivered the sermon of his life. He didn't mention the audit directly. He was too clever for that. Instead, he preached about Judas. He spoke of betrayal from within, of the serpent in the garden, of the whispering campaigns of the faithless designed to tear down God's anointed. He looked out over his flock, his voice trembling with manufactured pain. There are forces, even now, that seek to destroy what we have built together. They will use half-truths and lies. They will question my integrity, your faith. They will try to sow discord among us. But I ask you to stand with me, to pray for those lost souls who have allowed bitterness to poison their hearts. We must shield our church from these attacks. It was a declaration of war. He was preemptively poisoning the well, framing anyone who questioned him as an enemy of God. I sat in my usual 10th row seat, watching him, and I felt nothing but a profound chilling pity. He was building his own cross, and he didn't even see it. He thought he was rallying his army, but he was just confirming every accusation in the anonymous letter. He was acting exactly like a guilty man. And as the congregation rose to their feet in a thunderous supportive ovation, I slipped out the back door. The silent takeover was complete. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for him to call the meeting that would be his own execution. The audit began on Monday. The auditors, a team of 3 humorless-looking people in gray suits, descended on the church office. Eleanor, playing her role as the helpful, slightly befuddled treasurer, gave them everything: her personal ledgers, the board reports, access to the primary accounts she controlled, and she told them with perfect innocence that for access to the executive and discretionary accounts, they'd have to speak with Pastor Vance directly. The pressure on Daniel must have been immense. The auditors were asking for records he couldn't produce, for receipts that didn't exist. His entire house of cards was about to be blown over by a gentle professional breeze. The true power shift, however, didn't happen in an office. It happened on my doorstep. It was a Wednesday evening. A hard, insistent knock rattled my apartment door. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach tightened. It was my parents, Martha and George. They looked grim, like a delegation sent to negotiate a surrender. This was it. The family exodus from any pretense of love or support. This was the guilt trip assault I knew was coming. I opened the door. My mother pushed past me without a word, her purse clutched like a weapon. My father followed, his face a thundercloud of disappointment. He shut the door behind him with a heavy final-sounding click. "How could you?" my mother began, her voice low and trembling with fury. She didn't yell. It was worse than yelling. It was the voice of deep personal injury. "How could you do this to your own brother, to your family?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, leaning against the counter, trying to project a calm I did not feel. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. "Don't you dare play dumb with me, Stephanie," my father boomed, finding his voice. "Daniel told us everything. This audit, this witch hunt, it has your fingerprints all over it. You and your bitter little heart, stewing for 3 years. So Daniel is the victim here?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "The man who stole my life savings, who built his career on a lie I was forced to tell for him. He's the victim. He made a mistake," my mother cried, her hands flying to her face. "A mistake he was trying to fix. He has done so much good for so many people. Does that count for nothing? You are going to send your own brother to prison and destroy a house of God, all because you couldn't find it in your heart to truly forgive." There it was, the core of their belief system. The image was more important than the reality. The performance of goodness was more valuable than actual goodness. Daniel's comfort was more important than my life. My forgiveness was not a gift I had given, but a debt I now owed, an obligation to remain silent forever. "This isn't about forgiveness anymore," I said, and the words felt incredibly liberating. "This is about a crime. A crime he never stopped committing. Do you know where your donations have been going, Mom? The extra 10% you give every month? It's not going to the soup kitchen. It's going to a down payment on a lake house. It's going to a Lexus. It's going to offshore betting sites." They stared at me, their faces a mixture of disbelief and horror. They didn't want to believe it. It was easier to believe I was a monster. "You're lying," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're making things up to justify this horrible thing you're doing." "Am I?" I walked over to my laptop, which I had deliberately left open on the coffee table. I clicked a single file. It was a bank statement from the discretionary outreach fund that Eleanor had given me, showing a $10,000 transfer to a high-end car dealership. "Is this a lie?" My mother peered at the screen. I saw the moment the reality hit her. Her face went slack, the color draining from it. "He told us that car was a gift from the board," she whispered. "He lied," I said simply. "Just like he lied about the church being in trouble. He lied about paying me back. He has been lying to you, to me, to the entire congregation for years. He is not a shepherd, he is a wolf, and I will not stand by and watch him devour the entire flock to feed his own greed." My father sank onto the couch, looking suddenly old and defeated. My mother just stood there, her hands fluttering at her sides, her entire worldview crumbling around her. They had come to break me, but they were the ones who were broken. They saw the evidence, just a fraction of it, and they knew. They knew I was telling the truth. The power in the room had irrevocably shifted. They had no more leverage. The guilt, the appeals to family, the threats, it was all dust. What are you going to do?" my father asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm going to see this through to the end," I said. "Whatever happens." My mother finally looked at me, and her eyes were not filled with understanding or apology. They were filled with a cold, hard resentment. "You will tear this family apart," she said, her voice flat and dead. "You will be alone." "I've been alone for years, Mom," I replied, the truth of it hitting me with the force of a physical blow. I was just the only one who didn't seem to realize it. They left without another word. I watched them go, 2 strangers who shared my DNA. There was no sadness, no grief, just a vast, empty space where a family used to be. The exodus was complete. I was on my own, and for the first time it felt like freedom. Daniel's counter-manipulation was to call a special all-church meeting for the following Sunday evening. He framed it as a meeting for unity and truth, a chance to address the vicious rumors, and reaffirm our shared mission. He sent out a heartfelt email to the entire congregation. He was going to face his accusers, he said. He would answer any and all questions with honesty and transparency. He was confident that the truth would prevail. It was a brilliant, arrogant move. He was trying to get ahead of the audit, to control the narrative in a public forum where his charisma was his greatest weapon. He was building his own stage, and I was going to let him. The night of the meeting for unity and truth was thick with an almost electric tension. The main sanctuary of the Harmony Creek Community Church was packed. People stood along the walls and spilled out into the foyer. I saw faces filled with worry, with anger, with unwavering support. My parents were in their usual front row seats, looking pale and strained. They wouldn't meet my eyes as I slipped into a seat in the back, near the center aisle. Chloe was beside me, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm. In the AV booth at the very back of the sanctuary, Eleanor Gable was pretending to adjust the microphone levels, waiting for her cue. Daniel walked onto the stage to a swell of supportive applause. He looked every bit the martyr. His face was etched with a noble suffering, his shoulders slumped just enough to convey the weight of the unjust burden he was carrying. He gripped the sides of the large oak pulpit, his knuckles white. "My dear friends," he began, his voice a low, resonant hum that filled the room. "My family in Christ, my heart is heavy tonight. It is heavy because the spirit of division has been allowed to creep into our blessed community." He went on for 20 minutes. It was a master class in manipulation. He never denied any specific allegation, because he didn't know what they all were. Instead, he spoke in broad, emotional strokes. He talked about his vision, his sacrifices, the long hours he'd spent building this church. He talked about human frailty, and the devil's attempts to discredit the work of the Lord. He was building a fortress of piety around himself, brick by emotional brick. "I know that rumors have been spread," he said, his voice rising with passion. "Accusations have been made anonymously, from the shadows, and I stand before you now, in the light, and I ask you to trust the man you have known, the pastor who has christened your babies and buried your parents. The audit that was demanded will run its course, and it will find nothing but clerical errors made by a man more focused on saving souls than on balancing books." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But I will not let the shadows win. I want to address the root of this bitterness, the one known lie that has been twisted into a weapon against me." He looked out into the crowd, his eyes searching, and I knew he was looking for me. Years ago, in a moment of crisis for our church, my own sister, Stephanie, gave a generous gift to this ministry. It was an act of grace, but I have learned that she has come to regret that gift, that she feels it was a loan, not a gift, and it is this seed of personal bitterness that has grown into this thorny vine of accusation that now chokes our church. The crowd murmured, heads turned, trying to find me. He was doing it. He was throwing me to the wolves, painting me as a bitter money-grubbing liar. "So I want to make a public confession," he said, his voice dropping to a tone of deep humility. "My sin was not theft. My sin was pride. I was too proud to publicly acknowledge the depth of my family's generosity. I ask for your forgiveness for that, and as for my sister, I forgive her for this attack. I pray she can find peace." It was brilliant. He had co-opted everything, twisting it into a narrative of his own humility and my bitterness. He was going to win. The crowd was murmuring in sympathy for him. I saw people nodding, their faces softening. That was my cue. I stood up. My movement caught every eye in the room. A hush fell. Daniel stared at me from the stage, a flicker of surprise, then annoyance, in his eyes. He thought he had silenced me. "You're right about one thing, Daniel," I said, my voice clear and steady. It didn't shake. I was amazed it didn't shake. It carried through the silent hall, aided by the microphone Eleanor had discreetly turned up. "The truth will set us free. But you and I seem to have a different understanding of what that truth is. Stephanie, this is not the time or the place," he said, his voice tight with warning. "I think this is the perfect time and place," I replied, taking a small remote out of my pocket. "You asked for transparency. Let's be transparent." I pressed the button. Behind Daniel, the massive projection screen that usually showed song lyrics and Bible verses flickered to life. It wasn't a hymn that appeared. It was a scanned image of a bank statement from his discretionary outreach fund. A clear, undeniable line item showing a $20,000 wire transfer to an offshore investment account. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Daniel spun around, his face a mask of horror. "What is this?" he stammered. "This is a forgery, is it?" I said, and clicked the button again. The screen changed to a flowchart, the one Chloe and I had built, showing the exact path of money from the church's general donation fund into his secret account. then I clicked again. A screenshot of his spreadsheet, titled Lakeside Property, with the down payment amount listed. People in the pews were starting to stand up, pointing, whispering. My father had buried his face in his hands. My mother was staring at the screen, her mouth agape. These are lies, doctored documents, Daniel shouted, his voice finally losing its smooth pastoral cadence and becoming shrill with panic. My sister is a bitter, vindictive woman, am I? I asked softly. Then maybe they'll believe you. I held up my phone, the one that had been recording our last conversation. But will they believe you? Over you? I pressed the final button on the remote, and from the powerful speakers of the church sound system, Daniel's own voice filled the sanctuary, not his preaching voice, his real voice. The one from the secret audio file he never knew I had. No, the initial capital was, let's call it a divine windfall, an interest-free, and more importantly, guilt-backed loan that will never be called in. My sister, bless her heart, is more invested in my image than I am. She's not a problem, she's the solution. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound it felt like the end of the world. Every person in that room had heard it. The casual cruelty, the smug admission of his manipulation, the truth, in his own words. Then I played the second clip, the one I had recorded, his promise. I promise, Steph. I swear to you, as soon as the church accounts are healthy again, I'll start making deposits. It'll come straight from the church's general fund. No one will even notice. The admission of a crime, broadcast to his entire flock. It was over. Daniel stood on the stage, frozen, his face ashen. The fortress he had built around himself had crumbled to dust. He looked out at the sea of faces, no longer looking at him with adoration, but with dawning horror and betrayal. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. And then, he did the only thing he had left to do. He turned and fled, stumbling off the side of the stage and out a back door. No one stopped him, they just watched him go. The faith of the community wasn't destroyed, it was clarified. It had been placed in a man, a charismatic, broken, greedy man, and now they knew. The new reality had begun. I lowered the remote and sat down, Chloe's hand squeezing mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I just felt quiet. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. In the aftermath, everything happened very quickly. The police, prompted by about a dozen calls from stunned church members that night, arrested Daniel at a gas station 60 miles out of town. The evidence was overwhelming. The audit, combined with my presentation and his confession on tape, painted an undeniable picture. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. He took a plea deal, and last I heard, he's serving a 7 to 10 year sentence in a medium security prison. He's probably running a prayer group. The church didn't collapse, but it was profoundly changed. The old board of elders resigned in shame. A new, younger, more transparent board was elected, with Eleanor Gable at its head. They had to sell the Grace Wing, and the land it stood on to pay off the secret mortgage Daniel had taken out. They are rebuilding, slowly, humbly. Their faith, it turns out, was stronger than the man who had tried to hijack it. My parents. They sold their house, and moved to a retirement community in Florida, a place where no one knew their name, or the scandal attached to it. My mother sent me one single letter. It didn't contain an apology. It said, I hope you're happy, you got what you wanted. You have destroyed our family. I threw it away. She was wrong. I hadn't destroyed our family. I had just stopped pretending it was something it wasn't. You can't destroy something that was already broken. And me, I am still here, in my small apartment, with my quiet data analyst job. The court ordered Daniel to pay restitution, but a person in prison doesn't make much money. I'll see pennies on the dollar, if that. But here's the thing I've learned. It was never really about the money, not in the end. It was about my life, the one he stole, and the one I'm taking back. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. And when it wasn't a hot, angry thing. It was cold and precise, and necessary. I want to speak directly to anyone out there who feels like the designated shock absorber for their family, the one who is always expected to be the bigger person, to offer endless grace to people who see it not as a gift, but as a permission slip. Forgiveness is a powerful, beautiful thing. But forgiveness without repentance is just enabling. It's a license for the abuser to continue their abuse. There is a profound difference between offering a hand up to someone who has fallen and lying down in the dirt to be used as a doormat. My journey was about reclaiming my own narrative. It was about realizing that my peace was more important than my family's comfort, that my future was more valuable than their reputation. Sometimes, protecting the faith of a community means exposing the false prophet who leads them. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your family is to hold them accountable for their actions, even if it means tearing everything down to the foundation, so that something true and honest can be built in its place. I don't know if I'll ever get to Italy, but I'm free. And for the first time in a very long time, I can look at myself in the mirror and not see a victim. I see a survivor, and that's a future worth more than any bank account. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt trapped in a toxic family dynamic, or had to fight for your own justice, let me know in the comments below. What would you have done in my situation? And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding strength in the face of betrayal. You are not alone.